All right. So we'll get going again here. I want to thank again to our Prince William Sound Chugach level sponsors. This one of a few of many: Kathy Hodge Studio and Goodwood Bookkeeping, and Lazy Otter Charters. I think Mike Bender's been here almost a day. Of Lazy Otter, and to our many other corporate sponsors. And if you're interested in becoming one, get a hold of one of the board. Can the board members, who's here at the board, raise their hand? I don't know if we have any board members left. Barbara was here. There's Ellen's back there. Charlotte's here. So yeah, you can contact one of us. And again, if you're interested in becoming a member, you can talk to one of us. What it means. I also encourage you to check out not our website, but on our Facebook site, we have this thing called the Prince William Sound Stewardship Foundation Forum, and it's just a Facebook group that you can post. I was looking at earlier today, and there's people have questions about how much is this Zodiac worth? Everything from that to information about different events and volunteer stuff that's going on in the Sound. So great, just clearinghouse of information. So now we have Jim Sumner, Lani Lockwood, and Kathleen Keusenkothen, close enough. I failed that test. To talk about glaciers from an interpreter's perspective. What do you want? The facts or the story? And they got us covered, it sounds like. So I'll turn it over to you three.
Well, good afternoon. We're going to try and explain in 30 minutes what we do in 5 hours. So we'll do the best we can to try and make this fairly clear and still not spend a lot of extra time. First of all, we need to try and help people understand what a glacier is. And I guess the important thing to understand this is the glacier here in this area is basically a snow field that compresses for several years to form a firn that then starts to compress into glacial ice and then finally moves down the mountain. So when it starts to move down the mountain, then we're talking about a glacier. Before that, we're talking about an ice field. And if it's less than 25 acres across, then it's still not a glacier. It's just a snowpack we can have where we've got a lot of these avalanche paths that people confuse with glaciers. Now, the ice field becomes a glacier as it begins to move down the valley. It'll be several different kinds of glaciers. Some of the glaciers will come into the valley and just stay in the valley, valley glacier. We've got a hanging glacier where it kind of spills over the top of a cliff or a real steep mountain. We got the Piedmont Glacier that comes down into the valley floor and then spreads out. Now, what we're trying to do is to show people the different kinds of glaciers and explain them as we see them. I can tell by the looks right now, some of you people have questions of what we're even talking about yet right now, because you're not looking at them. And that's the big secret, is to, use the notes that you got out there for you when you're trying to give a presentation. There are many factors that determine the size, kind, and movement of glaciers. Some of these are the amount of snowfall and rainfall, temperature changes throughout the year, winds like willowaws that stack up a big cornice at the top of a leeward side of a mountain, steepness of the slope, shape and structure of the mountain valleys. These are all factors that determine what kind of glaciers you're looking at. Now, if more ice and snow melts off the face of the glacier than what has been formed at the deposit at the top, the glacier is receding. We're losing the glacier. If the glacier face is advancing, this would be an advancing glacier, more formed than is lost. So it's growing. Now, when I started doing this 20 years ago, we had at least 10 different glaciers that were advancing. Now I only know about one that I can verify, and that's what's happening over in Harriman Glacier. Now, most of the people come out to see glaciers. What they're looking at is not just to see something on the side of the mountain they can not very get close to. They're looking for tidewater glaciers. So that's what I'll emphasize at this point. Now, as you approach, again, a tidewater glacier is one that breaks off into the ocean. As you approach a tidewater glacier, you want to make sure that the people understand what's happening with that glacier, that we've got lots of ice breaking off that glacier. Normally, you're going to see a variety of ice out in the water. The smaller pieces, less than 3 feet across, are brash ice. Growlers are going to be 3 to 6 feet across. Bergy bits, 6 to 15 feet across, and icebergs over 15 feet. This is what the captains use to explain from one to another what kind of ice they're having to go through. And you'll be weaving through a lot of this ice, so it helps to understand a little bit about what's there and also the size of it. That you're only seeing something like 8/10 of the water of what's underwater and 1/2 above water. So you're seeing just a small portion of these. So if you see 2 foot of ice above water, you're talking about something that has 8 feet down in the water. So it helps them understand what these captains are going through to try and weave through this ice. Now, if you have an actual iceberg, this is something that's over 15 feet high, then you want to be able to make sure that people understand that they're seeing a real iceberg by getting to the real definition of an iceberg, the technical definition. Now, as you come up on a glacier, one of the things that helps them understand what's happening is you're going to see what's lateral moraines, where we've had the areas deposited on the side of the glacier. Now, that then turns out to have a situation where you have 2 glaciers come together, kind of like 2 branches of the stream. Both of them are carving this off the side to form a medial moraine. So you show them that in the middle of the glacier. And if you got another glacier that you see later on with that same feature, you can just ask them to go ahead and explain to each other what that is in the middle of the glacier, which is always interesting to watch. Now, if you have a layer of volcanic ash, you want to make sure you separate that from the information you're talking about with the medial moraines. Now, the other thing you want to do is explain that the glacier is coming down a very steep slope, and you're going to have all kinds of crevasses, all kinds of pieces of ice that are going to be breaking off of that glacier. So if you can show the people what they're seeing there and help them understand the size of these chunks of ice they see break off on these calving glaciers, they then understand that if something looks this big, is the size of a Volkswagen or maybe the size of a truck, so that they can understand that they're seeing something here that they don't really thoroughly understand, but they're starting to get a picture of it. Now, the other thing is you should be able to try and tell them about the height of the glacier so they understand the faces they're looking at. Now, another thing that happens with the glacier that they find interesting is the fact that you have these moulins. This is where you've got a hole in the ice that the water runs through. And if you can explain to them that there's water running through the glacier, under the glacier, even pooling on top of the glacier, then they understand a little bit more about the glaciers. So what you want to do is make sure you can go ahead and help the people understand that the glacier is similar to a living organism in the fact that there's influenced by a wide variety of factors. Then you've been able to help people appreciate and understand what the glaciers might be. Next, we'll have Lani explain some of the features that the glacier creates.
Well, thanks, Jim. Especially thanks for that neat metaphor about glaciers being living organisms or entities. Metaphors, similes, and analogies. These are some of the techniques that are great things that you have in an interpreter's toolbox. And so for the next few minutes, I'm just going to be sharing a little about what glaciers do, with a few tips on some of the interpretive tools that we rangers use to help people make a connection to this amazing place, this resource that we have here. Our visitors come to us with their own set of knowledge and experiences. And so guiding them into using what they already know helps them to make a better sense. It's a key to understanding and appreciating what it is that they're seeing. And so everyone's familiar with glaciers. I think we heard Jim tell us that you heard him call a glacier a river of ice as it's flowing down the hill. So rivers of water flow from lakes, cutting away the banks of the rivers and the bottom of the riverbed, carrying the sediment along. Glaciers are rivers of ice coming from a lake of ice, the ice fields. And as they flow down the mountain, they pick up rocks and haul them along, using them like teeth to grind away the sides of the mountain and the bottom of the glacier bed as they travel on down, just like the rivers do. So it kind of is using their knowledge to relate to something that they can make sense of, because glaciers, in a way, are almost an alien kind of thing. When you ask someone what you think about ice, who says glaciers? We all probably, that's the first thing we might say. But folks like that, not necessarily. And so while our glaciers seem to be standing still, they are flowing. And it's just that we measure the speed of rivers in feet per second, glaciers in inches per day as they flow along. And so as they flow, the glaciers become the ultimate landscape artist, if you will. And so we literally are surrounded by their works. But I like to think that sometimes when you try to point something out, you can't see the forest, the trees for the forest, such as cirques. And they're a great example. A cirque, C-I-R-Q-U-E, it's a cool French word that means a bowl. And up there in the mountains with their high sides, especially the ones on the north sides of the mountains in the northeast, those high sides are protecting the snow from the sun. So the bowls, the cirques, are often the birthplace and the final refuge of our glaciers. And so in teaching my 6-year-old niece how to find these cirques on the mountains, I said to her to think of a giant rock-eating man up in the sky. And he reaches down with a huge scoop and he helps himself to a bowl full of mountain. And when she pictured that, she could see that high side and the circular rim, even in the shadows, and even if there was no snow in it. And so helping people find things for themselves and then showing and sharing with others, it can be as much fun for us as it can be for the people themselves. And I often suggest when they're off the boats and headed back to Anchorage, that as they look down Turnagain Arm at all those mountains, maybe see them with some new eyes and look for those cirques. And I've counted at least 50, maybe 60, I don't know. But it seems like every time I go, the sunlight is different. It's a different time of the year. And I find another one. So I'm still finding them. And as John Burroughs, a naturalist contemporary of John Muir's, has said, to see something new, walk the same path you did yesterday. And so that's a good interpretive tool. An appropriate quote here and then when you are interpreting kind of brings a sense, a different kind of sense to what you are looking at. And so skipping back to that family visit, I thought to myself, yeah, wow, she's really got it. Because the next morning, Chelsea came up and she said to me, Aunt Lani, can I have my Cheerios and a cereal cirque, please? And so I thought, ideal. So cirques are fascinating, but we shouldn't lose sight of the mountains. Our most recent ice age, the Pleistocene, was at its peak about some 30,000 years ago. So there was a ribbon of ice all the way from northern Washington up along the coastline, all the way out to the end of the Aleutian chain. And some places it was 200 to 400 miles wide as it flowed along. And as it flowed along over the mountaintops, it used those teeth to grind them, chip away that mountaintop until it left behind just a series of rounded peaks that you can see today. And it's interesting to see them. If you look down Turnagain Arm, maybe you've noticed, maybe you haven't, or maybe you said, all those mountains are the same height. Interesting. Geologists call this accordant mountains. And these accordant mountains still occasionally have a few jagged peaks. The Greenlanders have a wonderful word for this. It's called a nunatak, Nunatak. And while there are some sort of romantic definitions of this about lonely peaks and things, the actual language means simply a piece of the mountain. So we have our nice accordant mountains with an occasional peak. And that peak was there because it stuck up above the level of those 1,000 or more feet of ice, almost a mile in some places of this ice sheet that was flowing along. And here are the nunataks sticking up, totally untouched by the ice. And so as I look down the Passage Canal or down Turning an Arm, and I'm amazed at those 2,000 foot plus mountains, and I imagine them covered with another 1,000 or better feet of ice. I think it's hard to visualize some things on such a grand scale as we have here in Alaska, but sometimes even the weather can create connections within your audience to the landscape they're seeing. If you've ever noticed clouds just hovering over the tops of the mountains, what if you tell them that those aren't clouds? If you were here 30,000 years ago, that would be the ice of our last ice age. And it makes, I hope to think that it does make a connection in there. And so I find that sometimes it's fun to ask visitors, especially those from Anchorage, and here's another interp technique, to get to know your audience. And there's a mountain there in Anchorage called Flat Top, some 1,350 feet tall. And I asked them, well, how did it get that way? Well, Chelsea would tell me, hey, Aunt Lani, the glaciers did it. And so glaciers leave their signature on the land with more than just cirques and flat top mountains. They also leave mounds of stuff that they haul off the mountain, this stuff, and it's called moraines, another French word, Moraine. And it means basically the material left behind by glaciers as they recede. And so how and why do glaciers recede? Well, let me tell you, in my first year as a ranger, I read a script for a glacier walk that said, a receding glacier is like sucking gravy through a straw. Say what? That's my thought too. If any of you can explain it to me, I have a prize for you. So here's a bit of a no-brainer tip. Your metaphors, your similes, any of your examples should be as accurate, especially even with a little science involved, so that you don't leave your audience astray or leave them speechless, as I was, and I think some of you were when you heard that. And so back to a bit of the how and why. As Jim has said, when melting equals ice flow, the glacier seems to stand still, kind of like it's marching in place. And then, gravy notwithstanding, glaciers do recede when more ice melts than the supply chain, the ice field, can replace. And so the glacier only has one gear, and that's forward. It never, ever backs up. And just as rivers carry along debris and silt that form the deltas at the river mouth, glaciers transport all sorts of rocky debris that build up to form the moraines. But unlike rivers that drop off the heavier stuff along the way so the deltas are made up of more fine material, glaciers haul it all with them all along the way. So on top of the ice, within the ice, and on the sides, literally your glacier is a three-dimensional conveyor belt, except for the fact that there's not a return loop. And so as they melt, standing in place, the ice leaves, the rocks just fall to the surface and pile up all along the front of the toe of the glacier. And in some places, this can be as much as a mile or two or many miles. And if it goes on for a considerable length of time, large amounts of material, sometimes hundreds of feet high, are deposited. And So the moraine at the east end of Willard and Black Island and Blackstone Bay, there's a moraine there that's almost 500 feet high. I talked to a kayaker earlier who said he's kayaked over it. And you don't have to be from the Northeast to be familiar with Cape Cod and Long Island Sound. Both of those are moraines that were left from the last ice age that carved out the Great Lakes and the Finger Lakes and all the other glacier formations of New England. And so sometimes when I see interpreters explaining to a group what glaciers do push occasionally. So if you step out and you push your foot on the ground and you build up a pile of rock in front, that does happen. But you're really kind of leaving something out, doing them a bit of a disservice. And what if they ask you what happened to all those rocks that the glacier was carrying? Well, perhaps they magically got sucked up with the gravy. I don't know. And now, as I turn the podium over to my colleague Kathleen, I want to leave you with some words from Lauren Isley that I often share on the boats. If there's magic on this earth, it's in the water. Its substance reaches everywhere, it touches the past, and it prepares the future. And for me, I wonder what the future of our glaciers will be. Thank you. You want my rocks, kid?
All right, thank you. Welcome, everybody. I think you see how hard it is for interpreters to hold it down, to stay in a 6-minute window. So I'm the sweep, I'm the cleanup. So this is going to be one fast cleanup here. So I was thinking with Paul, it takes 6 minutes just to say my last name. So we're going to try and head for to make this happen in a very short window of time. So my piece of it, Jim told us what glaciers are. Lani told us what glaciers do. And my piece is to say, who cares? Why do we even care about glaciers? What's the point? So as I thought about that, and we could go to an entire seminar for a lifetime, get a PhD on why glaciers matter, but I'm breaking it down to 3 pieces. First, the ecosystem. The ecosystems depend on the glaciers. This whole environment depends on them. I didn't get to hear about the little kitslets, mariolettes. I mean, those little guys, they need a glacier to survive. So there goes their habitat. The seals, anybody who takes these tours out in front of the glaciers, you see the seals are out there, and the harbor seals, as well as the otters. And they know that's a cool place to be. It's a safe place to be, because for whatever reason, their predator, mainly orca whales, don't like to go up close to the face of a calving glacier. Maybe that would be a self-limiting activity. I could only imagine. So that's an important ecosystem, an entire ecosystem. And now the plant people are coming in, and it's like, wow, there's so much to study about this. So that's a biggie. The number 2, and I thought it's really typified by today, it's the financial engine. And think of all the people that are here that it matters to. We heard about the fishing folks, no disrespect, that's important. But people come from all over the world to go see 26 glaciers. And I mean, you better have 26 of them. There's 24, I want the list. So we have to really pay attention to that. So it's for all the tourism. It's not just for the 26 Glacier tour that we partner with, but it's for all the kayak people that go out there, the jet ski people that are heading out, all the photography people that want to go, the private charters, and the science people. They have to get out there. How are they going to get out there unless they brought their own little pack raft? So it's an important financial engine. Then my third thing is my third one is my favorite one. It's the Earth's bank account of frozen fresh water. We haven't learned how to drink salt water yet. We don't have little tear ducts that are going to push out the salt water. We have to have fresh water. The frozen fresh water is in the glacier, so we have to have that. Now, checking on my time, this is really going to be fast. As interpreters, oh good, I got 3 minutes, no problem. As interpreters, when we're out on these trips, it's sort of like the elephant in the room, the climate change stuff, the climate crisis. You'll get, and this just happened because Jim and I were just out on the boats in the last week or so. You'll get the folks that are the true believers that already get it. They're us. They're here in this meeting today. So I refer to that as the choir. They already understand the climate crisis and all that entails. Well, sometimes as the ranger, those folks will come up to you and say, hey, how come you haven't talked about the climate crisis? Just because people paid hundreds of dollars to be on this tour today, how come you haven't gone into that and told them about it? And it's like, well, the last time I had that encounter, I said, I come from the background, the educational background that says one picture is worth 1,000 words. And we are going to see an area that will blow your mind. And we're actually going into Barry Arm. And all you have to see is Barry Arm and see Cascade Glacier and Barry Glacier, that we're both on top of this rock island. And now within a really short period of time, in glacier terms, that Barry Glacier is some 5 miles away. I mean, that right there. To me, that does it. So we show people that. We can show them the picture from the Forest Service. It was the anniversary edition for the Forest Service. I think it was 2007. It has a 2006 photo of those 3 glaciers in Barry Arm, where you see this rock island that the glaciers are touching. And now here it is, how many years later, just a handful, and the glacier's way back. So that's a critical piece. So with those folks, what I tried to explain is, if I were to launch into a whole climate change thing, I'm preaching to the choir, and you all would be going right on. Yeah, it's this crisis. We're on with you. But the other folks that are sitting out there wearing hats that say various political things, they definitely are not going with me. I looked back on my logbook that we were keeping track of questions we got asked, and we were supposed to write the climate change question and how you responded. And I forgot this even happened, but it was on one of my trips, of course. And somebody came up to me and said, "You don't believe that climate change crap, do you?" And in my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, pretty much. But, I said, what do you mean by that? And the guy said, well, this is the main thing I want to know. He goes, you just told us all these glaciers left all these terminal moraines for all these years. So that's a natural cycle. Now these climate people are trying to blame us because the glaciers are receding. So bottom line question, is it our fault? Or is this a natural cycle? And I always pause and go, the answer to that is yes. And they go, well, which one is it? I go, okay, natural cycle, glaciers, thousands and thousands of years, but now it's on steroids. And I say, hey, we have to own the steroid part. And I have never had anybody argue with that. They're like, okay, you relieved me of the burden of having to put up my defense shield because you didn't just straight up blame me for it. So now I'm going to be open, maybe a little crack, and hear what you have to say. So back to my choir idea. I thought, and I said to these people that were upset, I said, if I went all deep on climate crisis, I'm preaching to the choir. My goal here is to grow the choir. We have to get a bigger choir. So let's work on that. So I will end with this. We said in our little presentation, our goal is to be the guide on the side rather than the sage on the stage. So that's really what we're trying to do here. So keep carrying on and keep up the good work. More questions?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, three. That was Kathleen Keusenkothen. I got that right? Yeah. And Jim, Sumner, and Lockwood. We can move on. We don't quite have time for questions now, but maybe I'll hang out afterwards. We can have questions for the three of you when we're done. Oh, we'll do questions for you three afterwards. If people have questions, that work for you three? Okay, great. Thank you.